Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michalis, and I'd like to welcome everybody to another live trading session. And today we're going to be looking at the NASDAQ. Now, yesterday with the NASDAQ, we saw quite a strong decline. But since then, we've seen quite a strong correction as well. So, what we're going to look at is if potentially we're going to start to see buy signals again. Now, before we start to look at technical analysis and start to think about potentially where we may see buy signals. Based on those signals, maybe where we're getting indications where take profits and stop losses should be. We also need to take into consideration what is driving the price movement higher. Now, the first thing we need to look at is that last night, Tesla, one of the most influential stocks within the NASDAQ, released their quarterly earnings reports. Now, Tesla is the eighth most influential stock. They hold more than 2.66% of the overall NASDAQ. They released their earnings yesterday. Now, their revenue was slightly lower, nothing necessarily to worry about, but their earnings was 19% higher than expectations. Now, that is significantly higher, and because of that, the stock is trading 12% higher even before the US stock market open. So pre-trading hours, the stock is up at 12%. So that is definitely something we need to take into consideration. That is influencing the price movement of the Nasdaq. In addition to this, we need to take into consideration the global stock market and the sentiment and risk appetite towards the global stock market. Now, if we're looking at the global stock market, we can see both Asian and European stocks are trading higher. We can see that the Nasdaq, S&P 500, and the Dow Jones. We also can see the Euro Stocks 50, the Nikkei 225, the DAX, and the CAC. All major global indices are trading higher. So this is also another thing we can take into consideration. The only index which is trading lower is the VIX index. The VIX index is trading almost 2.5% lower today. The fact that it's trading 2.5% lower is actually positive for the NASDAQ. It's known as an indication of higher risk appetite, which is positive for the NASDAQ. So that's also another indication telling us that potentially we're going to see bulls controlling the market again. The last thing I also want to mention is that even though US bond yields have significantly risen lately, today they're trading more than 50 points lower. So this is something which is another indication, and it tends to have a ripple effect that supports the stock market. So this is a good reason. We can see plenty of reasons here, ladies and gentlemen, why the Nasdaq is correcting upwards. But even though we are correcting upwards, we're still trading below our trend line, which is this yellow line here. It is a 75 bar exponential moving average, and we're also trading below the price sentiment line, which is slightly higher here. So because we are trading below that level, at first traders may potentially opt to, instead of trading a significant upward trend, to first trade to that level, which is basically trading the correction rather than trading a full upward trend. So that is something we need to take into consideration at first. That if we're trading in the short term, potentially that is an area that we will aim for. But if we're going to look at the longer term, if we are going to see an upward trend, ladies and gentlemen, because we can definitely see a correction here, if that correction is going to continue, we need to look at where the majority of the resistant levels are. Because we can see we've got lower resistant levels like we can see here, and we can see higher resistant levels like here and here. Now, if we're going to look at an average, which I've already worked out for you, the average sits around here, ladies and gentlemen. So in the short term, we can take into consideration our 100 bar simple moving average as a potential target. In the longer term, we can take into consideration this level here. Another option that people have is that they can scale in. So basically, they can trade with multiple targets rather than one single target. So, for example, they may exit 30% of their trades at the first take profit, and then at the second take profit, they may exit at 70% of their trades. That's just an example, though. So at the moment, we can see that yes, we're trading below the trend line. Yes, we're trading below the price sentiment line. The RSI is actually at the neutral level, but we can see we're gaining a lot of momentum, and there's very clear reasons why we are gaining momentum. Tesla earnings came in 90% higher. The most significant stocks within the NASDAQ are trading higher this morning. The VIX is trading lower, and global indices again are trading higher. So we can see there's a clear indication there that potentially we can take into consideration. But at first, we ideally want the price to increase above both trend lines in order for us to take into consideration a more medium to longer term outlook. Until then, for a daily intraday trade, we can take into consideration potentially the 100 bar simple moving average as an indication for a take profit, which is currently 0.19% away from the current price. So that's more than enough for short term price movement. Now, if we switch over to a 5 minute time frame, we can see we're still getting again bullish indications. Now, we can see the latest crossover here is an upward crossover. That's the first thing we can take into consideration. The second thing to take into consideration is that we're trading above the 250 bar simple moving average on the 5 minute time frame. So this is also an indication that buyers are starting to control the market again. So we've got two indications there of upward price movement. But where can we take into consideration our next trade if we haven't already opened a trade? Because the latest crossover, ladies and gentlemen, was approximately 15 minutes ago. So if we haven't already taken advantage of that, where can we take into consideration the next trade? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is basically at the next breakout. So this is a technique that potentially you may wish to take into consideration. This is the breakout. It's using the breakout of the most recent high, significant high that is. If the price moves across this level, then we can take a look and evaluate potentially speculate in upward price movement. But if we're not going to see that and we're going to see a decline and the price declines below this level, then if it crosses below that level, then we're trading on a lower low and we're also trading below the 250 bar simple moving average. So there we can take into consideration actually that the price will correct back downwards to the day's low. Now, the day's low, ladies and gentlemen, is actually down here. So that's an alternative that we can take into consideration because, of course, we don't know what's going to happen to the market, and we also need to be prepared no matter what type of price movement that we're going to see. So that's it for the NASDAQ, ladies and gentlemen. We can see a clear indication for an upward trend, and we can also see a clear indication for an alternative as well. The reason why the price is increasing higher is because the VIX is trading lower, global indices are trading higher. Tesla, one of the most influential stocks, has significantly beat their earnings data, and also other risk-based assets, such as the US dollar, is significantly declining today as well. So that's it for the NASDAQ. Hopefully, you found today's trading session educational. In the meantime, though, goodbye.